Ai Weiwei was born in China in 1957, and his early experiences have left an indelible impression on him, so much so that it was almost preordained that this man was going to be an artist. And indeed, much of his work is autobiographical or stems from his early years. Now, Chinese naming conventions are last name first. So Ai Weiwei is Mr. Ai. Weiwei is his given name, but it was pointed out to me the first time I did a version of this talk that it's confusing when I talk about I, because the audience immediately thinks I'm talking about myself. So I will be talking about Weiwei, or Ai Weiwei. His father, however, is Ai Qing, a poet of considerable renown in China, whom we see with him in the lower right photo in Tiananmen Square in November 1959, shortly before he was arrested by the communist government and accused of counter-revolutionary tendencies. And this was the beginning of the Cultural Revolution in China. So Ai Qing was sentenced to internal exile and hard labor, and he and his family, including young Weiwei, were sent to the far northwestern province of Xinjiang. And when I looked for photographs to see what Xinjiang might look like, all I could find nowadays were images of the Uyghur Muslim re-education camps that the Chinese Communist Party has built for the detainment of that segment of the Chinese population, a phenomenon that Weiwei has spoken out against quite strongly. So he, as a child, lived in a hole, a dug out home that his elder brothers and father literally excavated from the hard earth of this high desert location. And his father was given what the party officials considered the most humiliating job, shoveling out the latrines. And Ai Qing had a gallows humor about this. He told his young son, people, they never stop shitting. And so this black humor and irony are part of Weiwei's formation as well. Now, another part of the Cultural Revolution, which involved sending intellectuals, teachers, artists to the countryside to do hard labor, was ritual humiliation. And every so often, every few months, throughout his childhood, the whole local populace would gather around. Everyone would munch on sunflower seeds. Those were the patriotic snack because the sunflower follows the sun through the sky, just as the good patriot should follow the deeds and sayings of Chairman Mao. And so everyone's snacking on sunflower seeds while the crimes of Ai Qing and other intellectuals are read out. And the populace has the opportunity to spit on Weiwei's father, to throw ink on him. And given that they did not have running water, Weiwei recalls his father's face could be black for days or weeks after these ritual humiliations. So as we'll see, this is a formative part of his experience. Now, some of Weiwei's work references his father's poetry. So this is the very first art object you will come across when you see the show in Seattle Art Museum, and anything with an asterisk is in the museum. And it is a Franken tree. It is made up of different species, cedar and ginkgo and camphor, bolted together with iron bolts. And these were pieces of wood that Weiwei purchased on the roadside in rural areas of China where, looking around for miles, there was not a tree in sight because everyone had been cut down for fuel, for heating. And so this is a work about environmental degradation, but it's also a work about unity. And this is a soul tree, but Weiwei has filled entire galleries with forest installations of these bolted together trees, in allusion to his father's poem, Trees, from spring 1940. One tree, another tree, stand distant, alone. Wind, air, inform their isolation. But under cover of mud and dirt, their roots reach into depths unrevealed, entwine unseen, end quote. So none of them, these trees, stands alone because they are all interconnected under the surface. And none of us stands alone. No man is an island. We are all culturally interconnected. Eventually Mao died, and I Ching was rehabilitated. The family was allowed to move back to Beijing in 1976. Weiwei was 19. And he entered art school. He thought he'd study film. But his projects were so out there that his professors refused to grade them. And Weiwei realized that there were only two paths to being an artist in China. You could be a traditional Chinese artist working with ink and brush, or you could be a socialist realist artist painting happy peasants. Or you could film happy peasants, and that was not Weiwei's style, so what did he do? He got a student visa and left for New York City in 1981. And that student visa, of course, ran out. But Weiwei did not return. He lived for 12 years in New York City, mostly as an illegal immigrant. And doing odd jobs, gardening, babysitting, whatever he could make a buck at under the table, including making portraits of tourists in Times Square, as he is doing in the photograph on the left, which was made by the poet Allen Ginsberg, who had known I Ching, Ai Weiwei's father. And so was immediately welcoming to this young artist. They became fast friends, and Weiwei noticed that Ginsberg never went anywhere without a 35mm camera around his neck. So Ai Weiwei took up this habit and began to make photographs of street life in New York City. He made some 10,000 photographs in the 12 years he lived in New York City, many of which he never developed because he couldn't afford to while he was in New York. But some of those photographs, he gave the film to the ACLU to document police brutality against unarmed protesters protesting AIDS or tenants' rights. These were extremely tumultuous years in New York City. There was rapid gentrification. The cheap lofts that artists had traditionally lived in, the tenement buildings on the Lower East Side, these were being knocked down and luxury apartments were going up in their place. And this was the epoch, the Reagan years, in which the AIDS epidemic was raging, and the government refused to, Ronald Reagan refused to pronounce the word AIDS or to give any resources towards a cure. So one of Weiwei's works in New York City is this work he calls Safe Sex from 1988, which is a raincoat with a hole cut near the crotch and a condom pulled out of it. So this is a work that is mocking the hysteria around AIDS, but also evoking the fears in a community where so many gay artists were afflicted by this modern plague. One of the first rooms you'll come to in I, Rebel is this one, which is filled with works from his New York period, including his last retinal works. And this is a term that he takes from Marcel Duchamp. Duchamp was the artist who painted the infamous nude descending a staircase that shocked Armory Show visitors in 1913, but who then decided to give up retinal art, as he called painting, art that was pleasing to the eye, and focus instead on intellectual art, like his famous ready-mades. It was Duchamp who in 1917 took a urinal, turned it on its side, signed and dated it, and called it Fountain, and exhibited it as art. It is to Marcel Duchamp that we owe the idea that art is what the artist says it is. And so here we see some of Weiwei's last retinal works, like that Mao triptych on the right that he makes in oil paint from a propaganda poster and then splashes with turpentine to get the runniness, the ruined quality. Then there are on the left his very final oil paintings, which are again drawn from propaganda posters of Chairman Mao, this one Mao facing forward, but informally Weiwei calls these his Mao behind bars paintings. It's an avuncular figure, but if you get up close, you can see that the surface of the canvas is corrugated, it's crooked, and this is a figure for whom Ai Weiwei has tremendous anger. This is someone who ruined his family's life and that, the entire cultural life of his nation. And in painting Mao, Weiwei is very aware of Warhol's Mao series, because in New York City, he can go to MoMA, he is exposed to all of this contemporary modern art. So Andy Warhol becomes an important touch point for Weiwei as well. Weiwei started moving away from painting and towards the ready-made, like that urinal, or here on the right, one of Duchamp's first ready-mades, a snow shovel. Duchamp was living in New York during the Great War and was fascinated by the hardware store. And he bought this snow shovel. He hadn't seen one like it in France. And he hung it on the wall of his studio and titled it "In Advance of the Broken Arm." And were he shoveling his walk with it, it wouldn't be an art object. But on the wall of his studio, in an artistic context, that shovel becomes a work of art. So this is something we call conceptual art, in which the idea of the art is more important than the execution. In fact, someone else entirely can execute the work of art as long as the artist has framed it in an artistic context. So Weiwei's shovel with fur is a reference to In Advance of the Broken Arm, but also to his childhood, to his father shoveling human excrement in that area where most of the inhabitants were in fact bovine and not human, because it was so desolate. So the cow fur, the shovel are references to that, just as his violin shoe is a reference to the Cultural Revolution, to the musicians, Chinese musicians, who trained on Western instruments and then during the Cultural Revolution were forced to smash their instruments and denounce their training and to be sent out to the countryside to do hard labor. So Weiwei subsumes an actual violin in a pair of cheap workman's boots. And shoes were something that fascinated Weiwei in New York City because they had been so exceedingly scarce in his childhood. And he rarely had a left and a right that matched. His father had no socks and had to bind his feet with whatever fabric was available to put them into the shoes to go shovel the frozen feces in wintertime. And all of a sudden, Weiwei is in a city where shoes are everywhere in a bewildering variety. Here, just a simple men's loafer in 59 different colors and patterns that he creates this circle of shoes out of. And in his New York period, he carved this stunning case for an axe, a useful object that he has manipulated just enough to make it less than useful, making the handle turn a corner, and then fashioning this very beautiful box. So this is something to remember when we look at his later work. In 1993, he learned his father was gravely ill. And he felt he'd learned enough from the New York art scene, and so he returned to Beijing, where he fell in with other young artists, some of whom he had hosted at his grotty apartment in the East Village in New York City. And so in Beijing, they formed an arts collective they called Beijing East Village. And Weiwei quickly understood how impoverished his fellow artists were in terms of their knowledge of modernist art. It stopped, their knowledge of Western art stopped at Impressionism, if that. And so he and two collaborators, Xu Bing and Zheng Xiaojun, in 1994 published the Black Cover Book, which contained photographs of and essays about major works of modernist art, like Duchamp's Fountain, which you see on the upper right, the famous urinal. And it also included essays by these young Chinese artists on what they hoped to accomplish with their work. They published 3,000 copies, and these were gobbled up by eager young art students. They were passed hand to hand like contraband. This book was so vital that Weiwei realized he needed to keep going. And he and Zheng would publish the following year the white cover book, and then 2 years later, the gray cover book. But their colleague Xu Bing was no longer involved with the project because he felt it was too dangerous in China at this time to publish information on avant-garde Western art. But those 9,000 books had a tremendous impact on the Chinese art scene of the turn of the 21st century. In the white cover book, they published what has become Weiwei's most famous work of art, dropping a Han Dynasty urn. Now, to hear Weiwei talk about this, he was just testing the shutter speed of his American camera, just showing it off to his friends. But he could have dropped a banana. He could have dropped anything, and instead, he drops a 2,000-year-old ceramic. Something that, were it in the United States, would either be in a museum or would be some collector's prize possession. And Weiwei has said he would never have done it if it were the only one. But there were so many of them, and they were so overlooked in the China of his day. So he was actually, in these years, selling Chinese antiquities, mostly to Westerners, to make a living so that he could do his underground art publishing and projects. And he saw that they were not prized by the Chinese government or the Chinese people, that the 90s were this period of tremendous industrialization within China. The old was being knocked down, the new was being constructed, and the millennia of Chinese art and culture and history were being steamrollered by modern progress. And so Weiwei is commenting on that destruction by making this image in which, it's a triptych, in which first he is holding the vase, and then he's dropping it. It's in flight, and then it is smashed at his feet. And in fact, he dropped 2 Han vases to get it exactly right, so that this sequence is actually a knit together of 2 different vase dropping instances, so that he knew he had the photographs he wanted. Now, it's not that there is no destruction in Western art. There are artists like Barry Leva who created his plate glass works with a sledgehammer, or Niki de Saint-Phal, who shot at paintings with a rifle. But Leva is not destroying an object of cultural heritage. He's breaking plate glass that is brand new. Weiwei is dropping something 2,000 years old. He was still carrying his camera around, and he was making provocative images with it. In this one, having his girlfriend, later wife, expose her panties in Tiananmen Square. And for the young people in the audience, if parents, if you are not comfortable with profanity, cover their eyes now, because as you walk in, before you're even into the main part of the exhibition, you will see this installation of these very provocative images by Weiwei and his favorite word. And he later would call his studio fake designs. He's very interested in forgery versus authentic, but the characters, the Chinese characters that he uses to transliterate F-A-K-E are pronounced much more like this word we see here. And so Weiwei begins flipping the bird at the Chinese government and at symbols of power. The first of these photographs that he makes, called Study of Perspective, is made in Tiananmen Square, where in 1989, hundreds of democracy protesters were mowed down by Chinese troops. Weiwei was in New York City during the Tiananmen Square massacre. It may have saved his life, but he was very aware of it, and Tiananmen Square has this, this very dark context for him. Now, it's not uncommon for artists to hold up their thumb at arm's length to measure the proportions of a figure or a landscape, but this is not his thumb. And in fact, he gives the middle finger over the next few years to emblems of power throughout the world. San Marco in Venice, the Eiffel Tower, the White House, etc. And he made a special T-shirt with the F word stenciled across it that he cut out the letters and then lay in the sun until he had the word sunburned onto his chest. Now, you couldn't have marched into Tiananmen Square in the year 2000 with a placard that said "fuck," but you could go in and unbutton your shirt and make this provocative photograph. These were also years in which Weiwei was obsessed with a book he'd brought back from New York that described, it was written by the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, and it described how Wittgenstein helped design a home for his sister in Vienna, and how he designed every window sash, every doorbell, every handle, everything down to the last millimeter. And Weiwei was fascinated by that obsessive attention to detail. And he decided that he could be an architect as well. And so he designed his own home studio in the outskirts of Beijing. He wanted to build it out of brick, which he considers a democratic, an egalitarian medium. You can see it's quite Bauhaus looking in design, like the Wittgenstein house, all cubic, squares, geometric, and it went up in only 2 months. So it was very efficient and easy to build, and he would start to be talked about by Western architects as the only serious architect working in China. And he began to get commissions both in China and abroad for his design studio, Fake Design, and has probably realized more projects than most architects with all of their years of architecture school and training. But as Weiwei's home was going up, he was mourning the demolition of the popular hutong houses of Beijing. So these were the houses of the poor. They were built out of bricks, and they were just, a couple of stories of that. And he felt very picturesque, but they were being completely subsumed by the fabric of the new city of Beijing. So acres and acres of these hutong houses were demolished so that high-rises could go up. And I have not been to Beijing, but I am told that they left 1 block of hutong houses so that tourists can see what they used to look like. There's this sort of charming little pioneer square corner of Beijing, and everywhere else they were razed. And Weiwei was very fond of these hutong houses, these humble buildings, and so he took 7 bricks salvaged from demolition sites, and he had, as he had with the axe, he had beautiful boxes made for them, as if they were precious objects, as if they were handmade books with beautiful calligraphy, or if they were beautiful jade carvings, not just these identical utilitarian bricks. So this is a work of memoriam, as is his feet. So Weiwei also saw the Buddhist tradition in China being suppressed by the modern Chinese government because it was not indigenous like Confucianism, but rather was an imported spiritual tradition coming from India, despite the fact that it was immensely important for the spiritual lives of the Chinese. For centuries, Buddhist sites were being, like those hutong houses, dismantled, bulldozed. Freeway could go right over them. The government didn't care. And so Weiwei gathered up these fragments of statues of the Buddha and made bases for them and made this beautiful case. And the cases are not Sam's. They were borrowed from Weiwei himself. And so this is an elegiac work. It is grieving for the lost beauty and spirituality that these broken off feet represent. Weiwei's Han Dynasty urn is a work about cultural imperialism, about the domination of Western marketing globally. And this is the most recognizable logo in the world, from sub-Saharan Africa to the remotest areas of Greenland or Asia, or everyone knows the Coca-Cola symbol. And Weiwei brands it across another Han Dynasty vessel. This one, a cocoon-shaped one, so that it accommodates the whole of the logo. Now, the first such vase that he painted in this way was from 1996. This is the one that is in the exhibition. It's from 2011. But this, too, is a nod to Warhol, who made images of Coke bottles, to pop art and its use of advertising imagery and slogans. Weiwei's Han Dynasty vases with auto paint dip the 2,000-year-old vessels in automotive paint so that they're shiny and metallic. And this is a work about China's desire to become dominant in the automotive industry. In 2009, Weiwei made Dust to Dust, in which he's taking even older ceramics, Neolithic ones from 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. And he has apparently pulverized these vessels and placed the dust in apothecary jars that he then arrays on shelving that is a kind of minimalist grid, shelving that reminds us of Donald Judd or Agnes Martin and their rectilinear forms of their art. But because these are recognizably apothecary jars, they also make us feel, did you have that moment when you saw him dropping the Han Dynasty vessel? That feeling of empathy for the inanimate object, but that object of cultural significance. So here we're expected to have it again, that, oh my God, he's ground up a 5,000-year-old pot? Is he insane? But they're in apothecary jars. And he wants us to think about rhinoceros horns, about tigers that are vanishing from China because of modern greed, because of the idea that they have, that a rhino horn has properties that can be used in Chinese medicine, that can give one potency or vitality. So we're expected to have that feeling of, and then to transfer it to living creatures. But it is also another nod to Marcel Duchamp, who in 1919 sold glass vials of Parisian air. Now, Weiwei, working in the antiquities trade, came across skilled craftspeople who helped him to restore antique furniture. And he knew that sometimes these same craftspeople were creating antique furniture, banging it up, aging it to make it look like antique furniture. And Weiwei had the thought of, well, why don't we take these objects and make them into art? So for this piece from 1997, he had his work people take 2 long, narrow console tables and form an X out of them, using only traditional Chinese means of joinery. So no nails, no glue, only dovetails, mortise and tenon joints, and so forth. Here, his corner table with 3 legs reduces the actual usable space of this even older, even more ornate piece of furniture to a tiny little square and turns it into a sculptural form that reminds me of a table doing a yoga pose. Weiwei did something similar with these much humbler furniture items, stools. And stools have, like his pulverized pots, been around since the Neolithic era. They are one of the first things humans made out of wood, that simple 3-legged design. Here, they are still usable. You can sit on this stool, but you can only sit on one or the other. Half will always be at rest. But Weiwei has taken stools and transformed them into elaborate sculptural objects that are clearly no longer functional. And he's done something similar with bicycles. Now, like stools and like those hutong bricks, bicycles were an everyday object in Berlin in the second half of the 20th century. There were, in fact, millions of bicycles in Beijing. Did I say Berlin? I meant Beijing. There were millions of bicycles in Beijing, but Weiwei began to notice their numbers dwindling as the Chinese adopted car culture and wanted automobiles instead of bicycles. Now, the most popular brand of bicycles in China, their Schwinn, is the Forever brand. And Weiwei made this large-scale sculpture out of 42 Forever bicycles that are now joined together like those items of furniture. But you'll notice they have no pedals and they have no handlebars. They cannot steer. They are just simply going around in a circle forever. In the next gallery, we see Weiwei's fascination with the traditional Chinese art of porcelain. In particular, the blue and white porcelain that is so familiar to us, that traditionally was made in the area of Jingdezhen. And the object on the left is an authentic 18th century moon flask from the Asian Art Museum collection. But the object on the right is a replica of a similar vase. And working in the antiquities trade, Weiwei was fascinated by the value that was placed on an identical piece of porcelain if it could be proven to be 200 years old and not made last week. And then his interest was sparked by that. Why is this worth so much? This replica worth so little? What if I put the name of an emerging global art superstar on it and call this an Ai Weiwei? Then how much is it worth? And so he's making these blue and white. And of course, he's not making them. He has contracted with people who have spent their entire lives making blue and white porcelain, who are, his is the idea, but they are actually doing the work. And in the same room, you'll find this circle of animals, another work that for Weiwei is about Chinese cultural heritage and kind of the hysteria surrounding Chinese cultural heritage. So these are based on a water fountain that was designed for the Qianlong Emperor in about 1760 and erected in his summer palace outside Beijing, a very Western style palace complex modeled after Versailles. These 12 animals are the 12 animals of the Chinese so-called zodiac, but the 12-year cycle. If you're born like me in 1967, you are a ram or a sheep, and so forth. And they were also a clock. If the sheep were spitting out water, you knew it was 3 o'clock, and if the snake started spitting out water, it was 5 o'clock, and so forth. Now, this palace was destroyed during the Opium Wars a century later by British and French soldiers, and the fountain heads were looted and disappeared for decades, and began to come back onto the art market at the end of the 20th century. In fact, one of the major art auction houses was going to put two of them on auction, and the Chinese government said, wait, those were stolen. You can't auction those off. Those are great objects of Chinese cultural heritage. So in fact, they were returned to China, but what Weiwei thinks is absolutely ridiculous is he says, these aren't Chinese art at all. They were made by Jesuits working in the emperor's court. They were designed by an Italian Jesuit, and they were forged by a French Jesuit. And he thinks the idea of there being this great part of Chinese artistic history is just absurd. And so the originals were just bronze, not gilded. The gilding is a layer of irony. Weiwei has also made this over life-sized series of bronze heads, and these are going to be installed in Olympic Sculpture Park. They aren't there yet, so they don't have their little asterisk yet, but they're going to be installed this summer. They will be there for 2 years, and this is the first exhibition that Sam has ever done that encompasses all three of the SAM venues. The main exhibition downtown, one major work at the Asian Art Museum, as we'll see, and then these at Olympic Sculpture Park. Ai Weiwei, well before the 2008 Olympics, was asked by the Swiss architecture firm Herzog and de Meuron to consult on the centerpiece of the Olympic Games, the Beijing National Stadium, nicknamed the Bird's Nest. It's a spectacular building, but Weiwei has never stepped foot inside. In fact, he protested the Olympics because of the human rights abuses that he saw perpetrated as the government was trying to spruce up Beijing in advance of the influx of tourists there for the Olympics. And the year 2008 marks a real turning point in Weiwei's work. Not only is he protesting the Olympics, but this was the year of the Sichuan earthquake that killed some 90,000 people. And many of them were students who were killed in shoddily constructed schools that were given to contractors who were cronies of party officials and who put up these schools just slapdash, and they crumbled, taking the lives of thousands of students. So Ai Weiwei started becoming a true activist and trying to find out information that the Chinese government had put a blackout on. They did not want this data coming out about the schools. So there are two videos in the exhibition that you can sit down and watch, and you can see just piles of rubble that used to be schools in between buildings that are standing up perfectly fine because they were built on graft. And he employed the most harmless looking individuals to help him with this project, like the grandmother you see on the lower right, who has gone to her local official to try to find out how many students died in my granddaughter's elementary school. How many in this kindergarten, and so forth. And Weiwei's work, Forge, is 100 actual pieces of rebar salvaged from these school sites. Rebar is not supposed to do that. Rebar is supposed to keep your concrete reinforced during an earthquake. It's not supposed to bend and loop and twist as though it were Chinese calligraphy. And on the far wall, here, you can see people looking at that wall, and what they are looking at is a work similar in its impact to Maya Lin's Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. It is the names of the 5,196 student earthquake victims found by the Citizens Investigation between 2008 and 2011. And so it's just a printout of these, the names, the ages, the birth dates, if they were known, of these children who died, although some researchers think the number, the true number, may be 4 times as high. Weiwei also made this snake ceiling out of children's backpacks because he saw so many children's backpacks in the rubble of those schools. And so to commemorate these children, he creates this, this snake ceiling that's very impactful. Now, all of this was exceedingly dangerous work in China. And when Weiwei in 2009 was going to testify on behalf of one of his collaborators, a fellow activist who was being charged essentially with treason by the Chinese government, he was taken into custody and beaten. And he made the famous selfie on the left in the elevator and then posted it on his blog. And they did not detain him for long because he was due to be in Berlin just a few days later for a major international art exhibit. And so they let him go to the opening in Berlin, but he collapsed getting off the plane. And they rushed him to the hospital and found he had a brain bleed from the beating he had sustained. He had to have emergency cranial surgery to relieve the bleeding. He posted that selfie on his blog as well. In fact, in the first decade of the 20th century, he considered his blog his major form of expression, and it often had 2 million hits for every post. So it was really reaching a very wide audience. In 2010, the government allowed him to attend his opening at the Tate Modern Turbine Hall. This is a project that took nearly 1,000 artisans 2.5 years to create. It is 100 million unglazed porcelain sunflower seeds in this vast space in London's Tate Modern that is one of the most prestigious installation spaces on the planet. And at first, you could interact with the sunflower seeds. You could, do snow angels in them. But then there were concerns about the dust that was being raised from the clicking together of all of these pieces of unglazed porcelain. And so people had to be confined to just one side. That was apparently much less fun. But the sunflower seeds recall his father's ritual humiliations, the populace snacking on sunflower seeds, but also they are about unity again and about power. One person, one seed is not very potent, but take 100 million of them, and if they all act together, something can be accomplished or changed. And this work is being exhibited for the first time at SAM. It's a new version of these sunflower seeds. Again, out of porcelain, each one individually hand painted, but these are shelled and the other ones were whole. Well, Weiwei's consistent efforts at needling the Chinese government, at exposing their foibles, led in 2011 to his being detained for 81 days without access to a lawyer, without being able to contact his family. Free Weiwei became a hashtag on social media, and so he was detained in this cell and constantly had 2 guards. Whether he was on the toilet or asleep or writing at his desk, he had 2 guards, no privacy, repeated interrogations, the lights were always on. And when he was finally freed due to international pressure, he made these emblems. Well, he made a mock-up of his cell, which you can enter in the exhibition, and he kept asking for a hanger to dry his laundry on, and eventually they gave him a hanger. He considered that a big triumph, so he recreated it in wood and in marble, as he did with the handcuffs he was detained with. In 2014, he had a major exhibition on Alcatraz Island, including these portraits of political prisoners executed in Lego. And they recall Warhol, they recall Shepard Fairey's Hope Obama poster, but Weiwei himself was not allowed to attend because the government was holding his passport. And when they finally gave it back to him, he left China almost immediately and went to Western Europe. He lived for a time in Berlin and also in London, and he has since settled in Portugal. But in Europe, he became very much wrapped up in the refugee crisis as his major issue. And so this looks like Chinese porcelain, but if you look closer, the imagery is tents and rubber boats and people with all their belongings on their backs. In 2016, he restaged the photograph of a Syrian toddler, Alan Kurdi, who had washed up on a beach in Turkey, and this caused outrage. Many people deemed it exploitive. And Weiwei said he was just trying to bring attention back to the refugee crisis, saying, quote, "I have traveled to over 10 different countries across several continents, having visited dozens of refugee camps," and stating, quote, "To refuse somebody so desperate is almost a crime. It's immoral, it's short-sighted, and it is not going to benefit any nation," end quote. So he remade that photograph. The photograph isn't in the show, but this work is. It's remade in Lego, but he titles it after the death of Marat, which is this famous work by Jacques-Louis David, a revolutionary artist. This work in the show is a found object. He was given this door with projectile holes near the Syrian-Turkish border, and he exhibits it as a ready-made, as an emblem of what people are fleeing, the violence they are fleeing, and their desperation. And he had work people carve inner tubes in marble. So marble is the material that we use when we want to memorialize something, but it very famously does not float. So this is another work that has layers of irony. He also created this wallpaper saying, quote, "We tried to come up with a visual language directly inspired by drawings found in early Greek and Egyptian carvings, pottery, and wall paintings. Within that context, we integrated the new conflicts with images found on social media, as well as images from my own involvement," end quote. So he wants to bring attention to the fact that refugees are nothing new. There are refugees in Homer. There are refugees in the Old Testament and the New. And in 2016, he attached 14,000 life jackets to the columns of the Berlin Concert House. To again try to keep this issue in the forefront of the public eye. It's also a nod to Christo and Jean-Claude and their wrapping of architecture, of buildings, to bring public attention to an issue. Recently, Lego have become one of Weiwei's most characteristic mediums. He likes using Lego because it reminds him of pixels. It reminds him of pop art, of Liechtenstein and Warhol. It reminds him of pointillism. But it's something that is a modern medium, and it's reproducible. Just as Warhol's silk screens were reproducible, anyone with enough Lego can make their own Ai Weiwei. This one is The Rape of the Daughters of Leucippus in green, and it's a reworking of the Peter Paul Rubens painting you see on the left. Now, of course, Weiwei is not putting in every one of those Legos. He has assistants. He makes the image. He makes comes up with the idea and puts it into a computer program that creates a diagram, and someone else is actually putting the Lego in. But Rubens wasn't painting every brushstroke either. Rubens had a large and well-organized workshop. Someone else painted the sky, the landscape, the fabrics. Rubens would come in for the flesh, for the parts that he was really good at, for the faces. And Ai Weiwei works in a similar way. Now you'll note one difference between the Rubens and the Weiwei. Look at the cherub on the left, which is replaced by a panda. And this is where Weiwei's art is even harder for Westerners to grasp, because a lot of it deals with Chinese puns. One of the terms for panda is very similar to the term for secret police in Chinese. And so, yes, it's an adorable panda, but it's also surveillance. They are watching us. And the work that is at Seattle Asian Art Museum is this rather ravishing, nearly 50-foot-long re-evocation of one of Monet's water lilies. But that dark area, that hole, that is the dugout childhood home that Weiwei lived in that far west province of China. And that idea of surveillance continues to be part of his work. He makes surveillance cameras out of marble, has them carved by marble experts, and he has created the Mueller report in monumental Lego. Something that he feels we need to be aware of, as he says, quote, "To control the information, to limit the truth. These are the most efficient tactics for a totalitarian society, end quote. Weiwei approaches the world with humor, but with an eye towards compassion for the most vulnerable. So in 2020, he had 100 rolls of toilet paper carved out of marble. That utilitarian, everyday object that we so totally took for granted until all of a sudden it was the rarest and most valuable thing in the world. Weiwei wants us to see the humor, but also the pathos. He wants us to identify with the dispossessed, just as he and his family during his childhood were dispossessed, were forced into exile. And he says, quote, "Art has to be involved with moral, philosophical, and intellectual conversations. If you call yourself an artist, this is your responsibility," end quote. And if we call ourselves art lovers, this is our responsibility. Thank you. I am happy to take questions. I don't know if we have a
So I have a microphone,
great.
or if you just speak really loud, and if I need to repeat it, I can, but I have one. I just can't run all over the place, so it might be a little slow. Do you want to speak up?
That is a really good question. What was Ai Weiwei's education before the age of 19? It's really sparse. He had a few Western novels translated into Chinese. His father considered them extremely dangerous. His father didn't want him to have books at all. But he had his father's stories and voice. And actually, his father had trained as an artist in Paris before he became a poet. He then was jailed, and it was easier to write poetry in prison. He was jailed in China in the 1930s. It was easier to write poetry in prison than to paint, and that was when he transitioned to poetry. So he would have had some training from his father, and he would have had some knowledge because his father had been in Paris. So he would have had some knowledge from his father as well. But in terms of formal art training, very, very little. Yeah.
Okay.
Did he have any siblings?
Oh, did Ai Weiwei have any siblings? Yes, he has several siblings. He has a brother by his same mother who is the person behind the camera when Weiwei is dropping that Han Dynasty vase. His brother is on the other side of the Nikon, I think it was, snapping the shutter. But he has an older brother, because half-brother, whose name I am not thinking of, because his father was, it was his second or third wife, who is Weiwei's mother. So his father had children from previous relationships, and one of his older brothers is, I think kind of ironically, a very well-respected socialist realist artist in China. So if you go to Ai Weiwei's Wikipedia page, you can see the section where it says siblings, and click on that brother, and you can see some of his paintings will come up. And they are oil paintings of, The one I remember is not actually Happy Peasant, but it's a kind of scene from Chinese history. But he's a well-respected socialist realist artist. So there's a strong artistic vein in the family. Yes, Jerry. I've got a slide for that. The connection between Ai Weiwei and Seattle is this person, Fung Ping. She is the Seattle Art Museum Foster Foundation curator of Chinese art. And she has, over the past decade, formed personal relationships with Ai Weiwei, with other people in his entourage, with his collectors all over the world. And so she is really the driving force behind this exhibition. She brought it into being. And so I have a friend who is a fellow art historian who is notoriously finicky about Sam, and nothing there ever meets her standards. And she thought this show was outstanding. This is the kind of exhibition that they would be delighted to have in New York City, in Boston, Philadelphia, London, anywhere. It's the largest Ai Weiwei exhibition ever in the United States. It's his first major exhibition in about a decade, first major retrospective exhibition. He's still doing lots of work all over the world. He's doing an installation for Roosevelt Island in New York City, public art. But this comprehensive exhibition was really brought into being by Sam's curator, Fung Ping. Yes. Oh no, that is a Korean artist, and it's made out of dog tags, and it's stunning. And I believe it is on view at the Asian Art Museum, and I cannot think of the artist's name off the top of my head. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful work of art. Yes. Excellent question. Does Ai Weiwei go in and out of China? No, he does not go in and out of China. He has a passport. So technically he is a Chinese citizen and could return to China. His mother strongly discourages him from doing so. She feels that he would be arrested as soon as he landed on Chinese soil. So technically, he could return to China. As far as I know, he is still a Chinese citizen, but he talks about himself as an exile, as someone who is stateless, who is really unable to return home. Yes, I see a hand up there.
Do you know of any other artist that does Lego?
Do I know any other artist who does Lego? So there are artists, I don't know if you saw the Hokusai exhibition at Seattle Art Museum a couple of years ago, but it included a Hokusai Great Wave created out of Lego. So there are artists who work almost exclusively in Lego, but they are not globally known artists. So no, it's quite a unique choice to work in Lego. Yeah, and some of you might remember that a few years ago, so it was 2015, Lego stopped selling Lego to Ai Weiwei because they were afraid of getting on the wrong side of the Chinese government. And they wanted to expand their market into China. And so they refused to send any more Lego to Ai Weiwei. And so there was a collection drive at Seattle Asian Art Museum, and we were all encouraged to bring Lego and to contribute it to Ai Weiwei. Yes. I see two hands there, so we'll start in the front and then, yes. Oh, so the pieces that he uses most frequently are the one-by-ones that you can see here. The little teeny tiny ones are the ones that he uses most frequently. But since then, he has resolved his differences with Lego, and I think they realized they were never going to make inroads into China. It's too much manufacturing there, and so at any rate, they now send. Now that he's working in Portugal, they send container ships full of Lego to Ai Weiwei. So, yes. Yes, he really does speak to the importance of including many people in creating his art, in encouraging people to create their own art, encouraging creativity in general. Yes, that is part of his ethos. So, oh, and yes. Did he make and or drop other vases? I'm not sure. The famous one is that triptych from 1995. It's entirely possible he's dropped many other vases, but that's just the one I know about, and that involved the destruction of 2 vases to make that triptych.
Rebecca,
yes.
You know the vases, the blue ones that he did, the traditional, and he then did this tower of them?
Yes.
I think what was so amazing is him being so rebellious but creating beauty, and not unless you look really close do you see the slavery. But didn't he also, either on that one or the other one, make a statement about he used Chinese people to make these, and he wanted to say, or I read there, I thought that he had said that it was also his pushback on when we think of made in China as being cheaply made, and he wanted to make the statement and really honor the artisans and the manufacturers.
So yes, and that is really behind a lot of those. The room with the blue and white porcelains. As Linan said, we think of made in China as cheaply made, and he wants to emphasize that it is, handmade, beautifully made in many cases. All of those hand-painted sunflower seeds also have, those are all made in China, each one beautifully, lovingly painted, each one an individual. The other thing to note about this particular work, which I don't have a tag for, and I can't remember exactly what he calls it, but it's a reworking of a Brancusi that Brancusi called Endless Column, and that has a similar form that's in and out and in and out. So he's often with the Marat, he's so aware of the whole of Western art history and his place within it, and alluding to it while making it Chinese and making it relevant to this war-torn, climate-changing planet of ours, and making it something fresh and new and vital.
I just want to mention back on that picture of the tower.
Mm-hmm.
Go back. So that's from the scene, but on the top up there, that's the snake.
Yeah, that's the tail of the snake, and the backpacks go from several to 2 to 1 to to like a kid's backpack to a little kid's backpack at the very tail. And I see a question there in the back. What is my favorite of the works? That's such a good question. So my background is in Renaissance art, and so I have a real fondness for the Legos that he does of Rubens. These altarpiece sized Lego images. They're in the same room that had the big altarpieces during the exhibit a few years ago called Flesh and Blood from the Capodimonte Museum in Naples that had these enormous altarpieces by Ribera and other great painters. And here's this stunning, these are visually stunning works, and they're made out of Lego. And they've got a panda, which is a pun for the Secret Service and the surveillance state. And it's a monumental image of violence against women that is also aware of that in our, it's not chosen randomly. Everything he does is so layered and has so many ideas behind it. But I have to say that this work is probably my favorite. So yes?
I have a question that might be considered China shooting itself in the foot with the fame that he now has, but does he have passports from other countries? Couldn't China, and does China, not like the U.S., not have an expiration date on its passport?
That's a really good question, because he left about 10 years ago, and that would be right when an American passport would expire. I'm not sure what his legal status is. I'm just really repeating what the curator, Fung Ping, said at the opening, which was that he has a Chinese passport, and his mother encourages him not to use it. She really thinks it is not safe for him to return to China. So I'm not certain what his diplomatic status is. So, yes?
Speaking of Renaissance art, Rebecca,
Mm-hmm.
Has Weiwei worked in Italy?
Has Weiwei worked in Italy? I'm almost certain that he has done something in Italy, but I'm not sure what. And I don't know, he has not lived and worked in Italy to my knowledge, but almost certainly he's done some sort of project or exhibition in Italy.
Okay, I think we're going to say, I just know when I first talked to, I don't know, last time I talked to Rebecca about this, there's a lot in that exhibition. For her to filter it down, I think was quite a feat, so I definitely applaud her for that, I think. And also, the show is at Sam. If you haven't gone already, I've gone. I'm going to go again now that I've seen this. And it's by reservation. I had some friends show up, so you want to be sure that you do reserve a spot, because it is by reservation, or at least last time you sign up for time.
Time tickets.
Time ticket, yeah. The water lilies this one's at the Asian Museum, and then everything else she was talking about, the showing. And then we're going to await for the big heads. You'll see the gold ones at the museum, but the big installation that's going to be in Olympic Park is coming. It's not there yet.
And I was at the museum on Thursday afternoon. My daughter wanted to see it, and we got there at 2:30 without making advance reservations, and we got in without any trouble.
Good.
So
Good.
It's a good idea to make a time slot reservation, but it's on a weekday, it's not impossible to just show up.
Thank you all for coming.